organization and helping of this. And I know there's some of you here that are probably here for the first time. So I want to introduce you, just with a couple of quick slides, introduce you to the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering. This is the first college of its kind that was established a little less than 10 years ago. And today we have over 1.2 million square feet of really high-tech facilities, equipment, tools that have been established over that period of time. Especially with our new expansion, when you drive by I-90, you can see the massive building that was just completed recently over the last couple of months. And that's the expansion that I'm talking about at the bottom. So the facility is all fairly new. The reason the facility has been built over the last 10 years, and it's really a true example of what we call industry, university, government partnership in bringing industry together to commercialize technology, to take things from the lab to commercialization, as well as to build industry partnerships for manufacturing and beyond. So this is an example of the kinds of companies that we actually work with on the semiconductor side or nanotechnology side. And all of the major players today are involved with the technology development activities that we have here at the college. And during that time period, there's been over $14 billion worth of investments, close to 3,000 jobs that have been established here at the college. It's been one of the major successes that both President Obama as well as Governor Andrew Cuomo has talked about in their talks. President Obama visited us last May, and the effect that we've had in the upstate economy has been quite staggering. So this is definitely looked at as one of the key models for growth from a manufacturing perspective moving forward. Fast forward a little bit, about 2 years ago, together with the Department of Energy, we established what we call the Photovoltaic Manufacturing Consortium. And this is also an industry-led initiative where we're in the process of establishing manufacturing development facilities. This is for solar PV, of course. Over $300 million program over 5 years. It started in late 2011, and we're looking at becoming the lead center for next generation PV technologies that are hopefully going to come online from a manufacturing standpoint in very short order. This is a partnership between, as I mentioned, between the Department of Energy, Semitech, and the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering. And we have about 40 industry partners that have signed commitment letters, as well as close to 20 partners that have already signed membership agreements with the consortium. So we're well on our way of making that happen. Again, if you look at what the consortium is charged with doing, it is to really figure out the manufacturing aspects of PV and making sure that here in this country we have a pretty robust supply chain to meet the demand for PV, which is going to continue to grow in significant numbers as we move forward with some of the new programs that are coming up in each of the states that we're going to hear from later today. So we're trying to sort of make sure that the upstream supply is met with this consortium that we're putting together. So again, similar to the semiconductor side, we have partnerships. We are in the process of actually signing up with a lot of these companies that have indicated that they want to be part of this. So this is just a representation of the types of companies that we're involved with. And several of them have, as I mentioned, have already signed up as members. So PVMC's vision is basically very well aligned with Lydia, with the Department of Energy's mission, the SunShot initiative that Lydia is going to talk about in a little bit. Our goal is to make sure we get to the dollar per watt goal that the DOE had laid out a couple of years ago. I mentioned R&D commercialization and innovation center. We want to become the ecosystem for that. Make sure that we have U.S. competitiveness, create U.S. jobs, not just on the deployment side, but the manufacturing side, the entire supply chain really. Create some collaborative programs and make sure new innovation and technology gets transferred over to the commercial applications. That leads me on to today's discussion. So one of the things that we've recognized early on is manufacturing and industry support cannot happen in vacuum. What we need is obviously the deployment side. Deployment has to drive a lot of the manufacturing initiatives that we have, and that's why we're here to talk about what we call regional soft balance of system programs, the soft costs related to PV installation, because that also has to come down significantly. in terms of meeting the dollar per watt goals. I mean, the modules already are well on their way to getting to the dollar per watt, but we need to address other aspects of the ecosystem to make this happen. So that's what I wanted to basically give you a high-level description of what we need to do today. And with that, I'll turn it over really quick to Lydia Sakarik. Lydia is the PV program manager over at the SunShot program at DOE. And she, as I mentioned, will describe the program a little bit more in detail and what we're planning on doing here. Lydia.
I prefer to,
It's on.
it's on, okay, good. I prefer to walk around also to see what's on the screen right now. So to reiterate Pradeep's welcome, welcome and thank you all for coming to the workshop. You will hear a lot more about soft cost. You will hear a lot more about the prize itself in a little bit from my colleagues right after. But what I will try to tell you in just a couple of minutes is how does this initiative fit within our much, much larger strategic SunShot goal, and how that fits within both administration and national priorities, and why we're doing this to start with, right? So I do hope that at least you have heard of SunShot Initiative, and I really hope that this is a redundant slide that most of you have seen. What did we do 2 years ago? 2.5 years ago, we set out to reduce the cost of solar by 75% relative to what it was at that time, to bring it to be we're not going to argue on this, but here's the close to grid parity in terms of the levelized cost of electricity relative to other power sources. And that time, we were greeted with great consternation by industry analysts and industry itself. It was an aggressive goal, or it was thought to be an aggressive goal, and we had largely focused on the technology side because DOE has been traditionally an R&D funding shop in the PV space largely, and so that was the knob that we could turn. What has happened since, of course, this is actually just going back to saying, just in retrospect, looking back 2 years forward, wanting to actually go to $1 a watt was driven by the models that maybe Robin Paul's going to touch on later, our SunShot Vision study that showed that price level that you have is a penetration of solar at about 17% of our power supply by 2030, and much, much greater subsequently as you go down in price. We, in fact, do have a national mandate, if you look at the very recent roll call, on how many Americans would like to see solar deployed more. And so this, I think, is a very interesting thing to look into. And if you look at the regional poll, you realize that that's happening across the country. And a message that I believe that we do want everybody to walk away with today is that the SunShot Prize is not the 10 million, 7 million, 2, or whatever it is. The SunShot Prize is the $6 billion market that is going to be the United States alone within a couple of years. So, and that really is an opportunity across the entire nation. So back when we said, let's go to $1 a watt, by the way, was a target for the utility scale system. For a residential scale system, we were looking at getting to $1.50 a watt. And we have broken down the cost very, very neatly in 4 categories primarily: power electronics, balance of system for hardware, balance of system for non-hardware, which we call soft cost now, and the module. And so each of these components was projected to contribute a certain amount and to get to a subcomponent cost that would reflect the added price. In this case, for residential, for home PV at $1.50. If you look at, for example, a place in the sphere of a module price target of 54 cents, really, so for the $1 to $1.50 module alone, right, had dropped about 50 to 54 cents a watt for the price, right? And again, I'm hoping you've seen the learning curve for silicon PV at least over and over again. Business as usual at that time was going to get us to 2015 at about $1.50. So this was our target rate for 2020. This year we have average selling prices between 60 and 70 cents, 60 and 70 cents a watt for silicon alone. We also heard, now we can argue about what are the actual costs, and I'd be happy to talk about it offline and whether some of these things are sustainable, but we also have, for example, for solar yesterday, give us a roadmap for reaching some of these costs a lot sooner, that are, we believe, actually in a very sustainable manner, a lot sooner than 2020. And so it is not out of reach, it is not crazy. There's great turmoil happening right now. There are great losses in the business model of these companies for the moment, but that is not going to be the case forever. So what I'd like you to take away from this is that the hardware side is well on its way to get those targets. I personally would like to see it go at 25 cents a watt eventually, because it will be even more competitive. And so we're not quite done in SunShot, even though we might hit this target. But what do we actually do in SunShot? So we fund R&D. The second half of this equation in SunShot is, so one part is penetration of PV when you hit low cost. The other part is national competitiveness. Out of the, this is the Emerald chart of efficiency records over the time, about 30 years or so that it's been tracked. And about 50% of these results were funded through DOE. That is absolutely terrific. That points to show that we are the leader in the R&D space. That has unfortunately translated into a very, very sustained loss of manufacturing of the set technologies that we're funding to develop. So this gives us a lot of heartburn, and I would argue a lot of wasted taxpayer money if it doesn't translate into something that brings us economic growth. It is a humongous market. It is, again, that is the ultimate prize. And so we think and worry a lot about how to reverse this. Again, how does this fit within the soft cost? What is really interesting and important is to say, as the installations domestically grow, so this is the cumulative worth of the actual of the solar installations in the United States, the number of jobs is growing. And we would like to see that amplified and grow even faster and bigger. And so relative to actually other jobs, the solar sector has had a growth that is about 3 times the average economy growth in the last year. So this is important because we do worry about, it's not just R&D, but it's also about what does it do for the nation. Again, we are not projected to be the largest markets, even in the near term, but this is not peanuts. This is over 6 gigawatts a year in the United States alone in the near future. 6 gigawatts is a lot of installations. It is a lot of money. And so if we focus just in the domestic market, and with that avoid the questions that might bring us into trade disputes and so on and so forth, let's just set the target of satisfying that market in the most economic way and helping it grow. And so maybe make that even larger, make it happen even faster. We are now a net importer. If you look at other nations, and clearly, so this is a pretty complicated slide, but what it shows is different regions of the world, what they make versus and overall whether they import or export, and the projected size of the market in the near term in all of these countries. What we would like the United States to be is that, if not a net exporter, at least to be able to satisfy the needs of its own market. And again, 6 gigawatts is nothing to sneeze at. We don't currently make that much. We make a lot less than that. How can we do that? When we strategize around, if you analyze the cost breakdown for this is cost of how much it actually makes, the cost to make a solar module silicon, not the selling price, right? So it is a little bit more expensive to make in the United States. Different components here, all of these components, in fact, are projected to be manageable and to be equalized through different means, whether it's technology that are going to make the labor component smaller. All of that can be equalized and eliminated. And by the way, keep in mind that means that it will be equalized and eliminated for all markets in the world. So any country will be able to then start supplying their own PV much more readily rather than importing it all the time. This is a component that will not be equalized. Shipping charges will still be there, and I would argue they will either stay the same or grow. And that so this is the important part. The module has gone down, and the system cost is not going down nearly as much. When the system cost is down as much as we would like it to be, the shipping charges now are going to be a significant cost overall of the installed system. And what that is going to do is motivate any manufacturer to manufacture close to the deployment. 6 gigawatts is a lot. If we could get to half of that in manufacturing cells and modules in this country, that's a great target for us. So you won't be hearing a lot about manufacturing, you won't be hearing a lot about hardware today, but from a national standpoint, there is a very important strategic point in reducing the overall cost of the system for us. I'm going to end here just to show you a recent analysis that Robert's team actually did show this recently. So basically, we've had the system costs, both in all sectors, steadily go down. And most of the system cost reductions were derived from these module cost reduction, as well as presumably installer operating costs. There's a lot more to be done, and I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to be telling you more about the rest of the system costs and what we can do there.
Great, thank you, Lydia. Unlike Lydia, I'm going to hide behind the podium this morning. So, for the presentation. So my name is Josh Honeycutt, and I'm on the team at SunShot that works to address the soft costs that we're talking about this morning and that the SunShot Prize is focused on. So just really quick, going back to something that Lydia brought up in her slide deck, panel prices have obviously plummeted to historic lows. We expect them to continue to decrease. I think my slide is out of date. These are 2012 numbers, and as Lydia spoke, we're seeing prices even below these levels right now. And this is excellent news for those of us that are interested in seeing greater PV adoption in the United States, globally. Even so, as Secretary Chu makes a point of pointing out, even if you paid nothing for the hardware, you'd still pay thousands of dollars to install a residential solar power system. So we're not quite at the level where we're giving away systems at this point. But also, as Lydia pointed out, we are seeing that the PV module prices are declining at a much slower rate than the overall system prices. So as you can see here, we're seeing a PV module price decrease at about 25% annually, whereas we're seeing the overall system prices decreasing at about 5% rate. So what's the hang up here? So that's why, given this disparity, the DOE has chosen to focus on, or enhance their focus on addressing some of these non-hardware balance of system costs. And what we're going to be talking about here today is the soft cost. I find this somewhat of an unfortunate name because I don't think these costs are very soft, cuddly. In fact, they keep a lot of us up late at night, tossing and turning. And also because I think they really are some of the most difficult, trickiest, hardest problems to solve as we work towards this SunShot goal. So really quick, just wanted to talk about what the soft costs are as we see them, how we categorize these. So running through these really quick, we have customer acquisition. So that's costs associated with putting together a bid, site visits, et cetera. Permitting, interconnection, inspection costs. So there's a lot of costs tied up, not only in fees associated with permitting, but also in that wait around time. That you turn your permit in, you wait for somebody to take a look at it, approve it, send it to an inspector out, and you have to do it all over again with the utilities. So a lot of costs are tied up in that. Financing costs. It's not easy to get your system financed, and we are working on a lot of funding a lot of different organizations who are thinking about innovative ways to mobilize capital, get people money that they need to get a system installed. And then we're also working with training the solar labor force through a number of programs, including our Solar Instructor Training Network, to drive down those labor costs associated with actually getting panels on the roof. And then we also are looking at operations and maintenance costs associated with the overall lifetime of the system, which are ultimately baked into the system cost. So these comprise up to 40% of the cost of solar installation, depending on the analysis you look at. And we'll have Robert Margolis, our lead solar analyst from NREL, give us a little bit more depth on what these costs look like when you break them out. They're changing rapidly, and there's a lot more nuance in here. So I'm not going to go into that right now. I do want to talk really briefly about one of these items that we have focused on fairly heavily at SunShot over the past few years through a number of different programs, and that is the permitting issue. So in America, we have 50 states with different rules, regulations, procedures, processes. Within those states, 5,000 different utilities with different interconnection standards. And across those 50 states, 18,000 local jurisdictions setting different, adopting building codes in different ways, different permitting processes. Some are over the counter, some are, online, really easy, nice, fast. Point being that there's really no standardization. There's no consistent process that an installer can expect to see when they go from one location to a location. And in addition to this lack of standardization, some of these processes are absurdly complex. So again, more paperwork, higher costs. And just to run you through a particularly egregious example of a complex process, this is the actual permitting process, and this is one chunk of the permitting process from we'll say an unnamed, large East Coast nearby city who's doing a lot of good work to address this problem. But it's somewhat absurd that in order to get a system put up on your house, on your business, this is the process you have to go through. This can take you up to a year to navigate. And what does that do? It costs you time and money. So these are the type of things we're trying to address through SunShot, through the various programs that we fund, and again, through the prize. So just really quick to walk you through a couple of the programs that we have at SunShot to address some of these issues. I mentioned earlier the Solar Instructor Training Network. So again, ensuring that we have a strong solar workforce, and this is a workforce that's growing at an incredible rate. So there's over 100,000 jobs in this solar workforce today in America. There's our Solar Incubator Program, which funds small startup companies with innovative ideas for addressing various aspects of the soft cost problem. So I mentioned financing, for example. Solar Mosaic, some of you may have heard of this organization. So they're mobilizing the crowdsourcing revolution to fund solar projects and provide return on investment to folks that are interested in taking part in going solar. There's also a number of other really exciting programs that are being funded through the incubator program related to customer acquisition, just making it easier to locate customers and to do initial bids and eliminate site visits. And then the Rooftop Solar Challenge, which is a program that I lead for SunShot, challenged 22 teams from across the country representing about 50 million Americans, 154 jurisdictions, to make it faster, easier, cheaper to go solar. We benchmarked these jurisdictions at the beginning of the program, and as we're wrapping up in this first year, we're seeing some really exciting results from this. And we haven't entirely finished our analysis, but we think that we've been able to, in the locations where the Rooftop Solar Challenge is operating, knock out about a week worth of that wait time that I mentioned. That might not sound like a lot at first glance, but if you consider that if you're eliminating 1 week of wait time, and there are tens of thousands of systems being installed, that adds up to literally hundreds of years of bureaucracy, of red tape cut, lives saved essentially. So I don't go as far as to say we're saving lives at the Department of Energy, but one could look at it that way. So we're doing a lot to target soft costs. We're really excited about the results, and I think that a lot of this work has gotten the community very excited as well. And I think as innovative and interesting as this work is, I think SunShot Prize represents another innovative way to rather than a typical DOE grant-funded program to mobilize the creativity and the innovation in the marketplace. And I'm going to let Amar talk a little bit more about what drove us to establish a prize and a little bit more about that prize.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amar Kisebati. I'm part of the SunShot team that Josh was talking about that can't sleep at night because we're constantly thinking about soft cost problems and solutions at the same time. So about a year ago, the SunShot team started thinking about different ways of creating change in the marketplace. Unlike the conventional approach that we normally follow, which is to design grant funding opportunities, we wanted to come up with something different, something that is sort of embodies our vision, our sort of mission in life, something that is sort of open, that allows people to participate somehow, even the public can be engaged in, flexible, so we don't dictate how you solve these problems, we allow you to think outside the box, sort of try the unthinkable in a way. But it also rewards success. It's based upon performance. And we wanted it to be competitive to give it a sense of urgency. As a result, after thinking and working for months and months, we came up with the SunShot Prize. And in the process of designing the SunShot Prize, we learned really a few valuable lessons. One of them is that the prize can be a very powerful engine for change. It can organize people, it can organize and mobilize communities around solving problems, it can identify talents, it can make communities even stronger, it educates people, it actually changes perceptions. It can change the public perception about a problem or a challenge. It also, believe it or not, can mobilize capital, which is sometimes it's hard to mobilize. And the second lesson, we were surprised, in fact, that the private sector had learned this almost 10 years ago, and the number of prizes in the private sector has exploded for the past 10 years. It's just phenomenal, and we're talking about profit and non-for-profit foundations funding the majority of the prizes that you see out there. Approximately 80% of the prizes today are funded by the private sector, whether it's for-profit and non-profit. And we're talking about large companies like Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Cisco. I mean, these guys are using the power of prizes to create market change. The third lesson that we learned is that the rules are really very essential. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the rules. But today, I'm not going to talk too much about the rules. Instead, I'm going to give you a story. The story starts with this picture. You have Napoleon holding a can of soup. You see, Napoleon had a problem because he needed to feed his army. And when he was going on these missions, long missions, he could not rely on the local market basically to get the food. So he wanted a method to preserve the food so he can feed his army without any dependence on the local markets. So he thought, maybe I will announce a prize and see who can create that method. So in 1795, he put a prize for 12,000 francs, which is equivalent to 40,000 US dollars in today's dollars. It took 15 years for a chef in Paris to figure out a method, which basically we all recognize today, and that method essentially created the canning industry. What's interesting about this is I made some sort of back of the envelope, did not want to read reports, to calculate sort of this market industry size. And I sort of estimated it to be about $40 billion. So in 200 years, the value of that 40,000 prize is equal to 40 billion. That's 1 million times increase in 200 years. This is the picture of the man who came up with that solution. So just realize, imagine how this prize was not really, after all, that 40,000 US dollars. The real prize was this big market. So in the context of solar, and if you like, if you don't like a million times, you can calculate the CAGRs and figure out it's a 7% annual for 200 years. That's a pretty impressive sort of growth rate. So in the context of solar, we know that there's a market, and we can sort of agree or disagree what the size of that market, and Robert can give you better estimates. But I like also back of the envelope sort of things that I can convince you right now. We can do the calculations together, and I can convince you that there's a tremendous market out there. So focus purely on the rooftop residential sort of systems. Forget everything else, just focus on that segment. Assume there's 100,000 households out there in the US, 25% of them sort of suitable for PV for all kinds of reasons, shading, ownership structures, whatnot. That's 25 million households. Now, if we can get to a $2 watt per $2 watt, then an average system is gonna, be priced about $10,000. If you get 1 out of 3 people out of these 25 to commit and actually install solar, you have a $75 billion market. Now, if you can get 50% of that population to adopt solar, you have a $125 billion market. So to echo what Lydia was saying, the real prize is not that $10 million that we announced last September. The real prize is a bigger market than this segment. So why we're here today? We're here today for one reason and one reason only, which is to use that power, the power of a prize, in mobilizing people to unlock a market potential that's unimaginable. And I say we need to get started. But just to give you a snapshot of the prize, for those who did not read it, I'm just going to give you just a few bullet points. It's a $10 million prize we announced last September, and it's really for the first 3 teams that can demonstrate $1 per watt on average for soft cost. This is not for the total system, but only for soft cost. And I know it gets tricky how you calculate the soft cost, and we put a lot of rules to help you sort of understand how we look at that soft cost, how we calculate it. And our rules is really broken. I mean, the whole document's about 10 pages, so it's not long, unlike our FOAs and funding opportunities are normally about 90 pages. So this one is not that long. You can read it. It's accessible, I hope. And the rules are broken into 3 sort of areas. There's technical related rules, there's financial and accounting related rules, and there's business sustainability rules. But the target is deploying 6,000 systems. Start with a phase 1, 5,000 systems before 2015. And these system has to be residential or small scale. So it could be between 2 kilowatt to 15 kilowatt, anywhere in the country. And after that, after 2015, within 12 months, you need to deploy another 1,000 system just to demonstrate that you can actually repeat this, unique, innovative way of getting to that that $1 watt average. It's important to register so you can actually compete, because the systems that are installed before registration would not count. So that's very important. So if you want to compete, you need to register as soon as possible. And registration is really simple. You only need to submit a concept paper, and we promise to give you feedback, constructive feedback, to help you sort of think about some of the challenges that you may encounter in your concept. And we promise to do it in 30 days or even faster. And with that, I want to introduce Robert Margolis to the podium. I mean, Robert does not need any introduction, but I was instructed to, introduce him. Dr. Robert Margolis is a senior energy analyst in Washington, D.C., Office of NREL. Since joining NREL in 2003, he has been the lead analyst for the solar technology program. His role has helped to define and carry out a broad research agenda focused on examining the potential for the challenges and the potential for and challenges related to widespread of adoption of solar energy. His research interests include energy technology and policy, research, development, and demonstration policy, and energy economic environmental modeling. He has a bachelor's degree from in electrical engineering from the University of Rochester, and a master's degree from MIT, and a PhD from Princeton. So Robert.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that. Sure. Thank you for that great intro. And it looks like we're alternating between the people that stand in front and the people that stand behind. So I'm going to take the back here. So I'm going to provide an update on soft costs and talk a little bit about the evolving markets and challenges. Most of what I'm going to talk about is focused on the residential sector today because that is where the prize is focused. So I will focus more on residential than commercial utility scale, but certainly people have questions on the other market segments. I'm happy to talk about that too, either in Q&A or later when we have opportunities. So I will talk about, sort of provide some market and pricing trends by sector. Actually, I think Lydia showed one or two of my slides already. Provide some historical and near-term projections on the industry, particularly in the context of the SunShot targets and understanding where the industry is and where it needs to go to meet the targets. Talk about some of the recent changes in business models and their potential impacts on market and pricing, particularly emergence of a third-party ownership model, what the implications for that model might be for the industry, and again, we're sort of focused mostly on the residential sector. And then I'll talk a little bit about the market dynamics in a low-cost post-ITC world to give a little bit of a flavor of this notion of how big a market this could lead to. So it's, again, it gets back to this question of if people are successful in reaching the types of cost levels that we're talking about achieving, it will open vast markets across the country and create opportunities for growth. So again, it's the prize in some ways is the immediate prize that DOE is offering, but it's also the opportunity to be a first mover in a market that's going to grow very dramatically over the next couple of years. So, that is not right. Is our own presentation there? Very odd. Okay, so there's a couple slides missing. That's good. All right, well, you know what? I'll just talk about them. How's that sound? So I do have some notes. So I'll read my notes. And actually, one of them was Lydia, was the one that Lydia showed that had the global demand growing over time. And so, again, this is a little bit weird, but we'll have a couple blank slides and I'll just talk. How's that sound? So maybe I will come out here. So we've seen that global demand has been growing pretty dramatically, reaching about 30 gigawatts last year. So again, that's a really big number. Nuclear power plants is about a gigawatt. Solar has a lower capacity factor, but still, it's a lot. And so we have globally manufacturing capacity on an annual basis to produce, well, actually the manufacturing capacity is closer to 50 to 60 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity today. But we've seen a lot of change in the market in terms of how different countries are experiencing growth. This year, in 2013, actually China is expected to be the world's largest market, replacing Germany, with close to 10 gigawatts of installations probably. And Japan is coming on strong also, possibly having 6 to 9 gigawatts of installations this year. In the US last year, we had 3.5 or something like that gigawatts of installations. Again, that's expected to grow to be 4 to 5 gigawatts this year, potentially getting to 10 gigawatts a year. So we're talking 10 gigawatts a year in the next couple of years. Our long-term projections envisioned for the industry are going to be between 25 to 30 gigawatts a year over the next 5 to 6 years by 2020, 2030 timeframe. So again, this industry is growing rapidly. As prices are coming down, it's really starting to take off, and there's a lot of opportunity. And it's going to continue to grow and change. Also, within the U.S., we've seen considerable growth over the past couple of years, and the residential sector has actually been the most steady growth in terms of the industry. There were about 490 megawatts of installed capacity in 2012 in the residential sector this last year. So, and in terms of the states that are leading, the top 4 states are California, Arizona, New Jersey, and Hawaii, accounting for roughly 70% of the residential market last year in 2012. But there are a lot of other states that are coming on strong, and in particular New York, where we are today, there's a lot of activity, recent announcements about significant investments, both in terms of trying to solve some of the soft cost barriers, but also growing the market on manufacturing and installation. So it's an exciting place to be, and there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in places like New York, where we have pretty good sun and high electricity prices to see a lot of growth. So we've also seen over time the prices of solar decline pretty dramatically. So again, that comes back to that slide that Lydia showed on the module price, but we also see that at the system price level. And over the past 10 years, we've seen the average price of residential systems decline from being over $10 per watt in 2002 to being about $5 per watt in 2012. So about half in a decade. And we're expecting to see further price declines over the next couple of years. But if we're at $5 a watt today, $4 a watt in 2013 is sort of we're expecting residential prices to be closer to. There's still a long way to go to get to that $1.50 a watt that the DOE has set as its long-term target. We see that module prices have come down considerably, and in terms of where analysts expect those prices to go today, they're sort of as Lydia observed, between say 60 to 70 cents a watt for modules. Most analysts sort of expect them to sort of maybe go up a little, maybe go down a little, not go way up, we're not going to see $2 a watt modules. We might see modules at 80 cents. We might see modules at 60 cents or even 50 cents. So there's a range going forward, but we're not likely to see huge reductions in the cost of the total system come from the modules over the next 5 to 10 years. So it comes back to this point of the place where the most opportunities are for cost reductions, and the barriers to seeing the market grow have to do with a lot of the soft costs that we're talking about here today. I think I'm on my next slide. So here we see the 2010 benchmarks versus the 2020 targets for SunShot. And you'll see that sometimes these numbers are presented in different ways, and exactly what's included in soft costs has been a little bit tricky and been somewhat debated over time. In this chart, we show that the 2010 benchmark for residential systems was a little over $6 a watt, with roughly half of those costs being classified as soft costs. And that includes the categories that Josh talked about, the customer acquisition, permitting, inspection, interconnection, installation labor, financing, and also other soft costs, which is a pretty big part of it, including profit and overhead and those types of things. And so starting at a little over $3 a watt in 2010, we need to get soft costs down to 65 cents per watt in the residential sector by 2020. So that's a really dramatic decline in soft costs. Now, you also heard Amar talk about how the SunShot Prize here is to get to $1 a watt on the soft costs for small residential type systems. So we're not asking you to get all the way. We're asking you to take a dramatic step forward and get us a big distance. That's why it's a near-term prize. The expectation is that costs will continue to decline once the dollar a watt barrier is broken in terms of soft costs. So again, so total cost of the installed system doesn't need to be $1. It can be more than that. It's the soft cost piece that we're focused on here in this piece of discussion. Oh, this is very bizarre because this is supposed to be earlier. I already talked about this slide. We'll see how it goes. This slide basically, so we've seen that there's challenges on the soft cost side, and a lot of the challenges are linked to state and local policies. So federal government has a role, but a lot of things are really driven at the state level. And again, Josh, I think, alluded to some of these dynamics. So at the state level, we see that utility regulation, interconnection processes, and third-party power sales, or who can play in the market, is really regulated at the state level. And there's a lot going on at the local level also in terms of codes and standards and solar access, the permitting process. So it's really going to take a lot more than a federal role, but really a lot of activity at the state and local. And again, I think that's where a lot of the team formation and partnering could take place to really help achieve the types of cost reductions envisioned in SunShot. So, but because there's a lot of variation across these state and local regulations and rules, we see significant variation in the pricing across jurisdictions. Seems like all my good slides are missing. This is the bottom. All right, we'll keep going. What's my choice, right? I wasn't going to read my notes, but I guess I have to. So there has been, there is considerable variation across states over in terms of pricing of systems. And when we look at the data across some of the key markets in the industry today, we see that there's, on average, sort of the average prices, there's a variation of between $1 to $2 in pricing across states. But there has been a downward trend over time. So, and for example, in the past year, average prices for installed systems, residential systems, have declined about $1 a watt in the past year on average across different states. But there's still a lot of variation both across states and within states also. We see that there's a lot of variation. And a lot of that, an industry that has a lot of variation in its pricing like that, it can be due to a lot of things. It can be due to a lack of competition. It can be due to these variations in the regulations. It can just be that it's a really immature and growing industry. And it can have a lot to do with the way that the pricing is reported also in terms of the industry. And so there's a lot of noise in the data, and there's a lot of debate about what the real pricing is really happening. We've also seen that during the past couple of years, third-party ownership there's been a pretty dramatic increase in third-party ownership model or leasing model in a number of states in the U.S. For example, in California, which is the largest U.S. market, we've seen that about 3 or 4 years ago, third-party ownership accounted for about 10% of residential sales. In 2012, it was closer to 70%. In Arizona, we've seen a similar. Arizona was the second largest market last year. we saw a similar really rapid increase in third-party ownership, going from 10% 3 years ago to about 90% of the market last year. So there's a lot happening in terms of third-party ownership, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's also a number of other markets where we see it emerging in the marketplace, and currently there are 13 states with sort of leasing models that are being pursued and growing. So there is growing evidence that the emergence of the third-party ownership or leasing model has been changing the market dynamics considerably, opening up the residential market to a broader range of residential customers. So in particular, as shown in this figure, the correlation between PV adoption and household income is highly correlated for middle income consumers. We see that there's a much higher correlation for middle income consumers that adopt via third-party ownership rather than host-owned systems. So we see that the introduction of this business model is opening up the market to a new set of customers in the space. And this is particularly, we did this analysis based on data in Los Angeles, but we do think this is likely to apply more broadly. And that's not terribly surprising if you think about what the sort of the lease model does. It eliminates the first cost, which is a huge barrier for PV. It can also reduce the complexity of the process significantly for the consumer, and also by the third-party lease company basically taking on the whole process of permitting and interconnection and all of those aspects of it. It can also provide the consumer with performance guarantees. You're only paying for the electricity that gets produced. So it sort of shifts the risk of performance from the end user onto the lease company, coming with maintenance contracts and performance guarantees. And it provides a hedge to the consumer potentially against future price increases in electricity. So there are a lot of potential positives on the third-party ownership model, but there's a lot of other ideas that people are trying to pursue and ways that this could evolve. So we do see activity in terms of things like new financing mechanisms that are coming in. And I think during the day people will talk about some of those types of things. We've also seen significant growth of the use of microinverters in the residential sector during the past couple of years. So there's a lot happening in terms of the way the technology is changing. So again, we're talking today a lot about soft costs, but soft costs can't really be separated completely from the equipment, how the equipment is designed, or how it's structured, how you have to install it, can have significant impact on the labor and other activities related to soft costs. So microinverters are a good example of how the technology is changing really rapidly. And these two charts illustrate this trend in particular for California. The chart on the left shows that microinverters grew from being negligible in 2009 to accounting for roughly 20% of the market in California, the residential market in California in 2012. In contrast, on the right-hand chart, we see that there's a significant difference between microinverter market penetration in third-party versus host-owned systems. So the dashed line is the percentage of host-owned systems, the sort of cash purchase type systems, that use microinverters. And we can see that's risen to almost 50%.
You try a new 12-line presentation, just to make sure you have all the slides.
Okay. There's not that many left. Yeah, there's not going to be more. That's just, so try to open up.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave.
No. So we can see in this slide, as I was pointing this dashed line, for host-owned systems that in California, roughly 50% of host-owned systems use microinverters in California. So there seems to be this bifurcation where microinverters are penetrating host-owned systems much more rapidly than third-party ownership. And it would be an interesting discussion. We're doing some research and trying to understand what the dynamics are. I have some theories about, or some hypotheses about it might be easier to get in as a small installer with microinverters and sell systems, but you might not have the sort of backing of large firms that have banks behind them and are doing leases. So it might be sort of more direct sales and in the marketplace. But again, we're trying to sort of tease out what those differences are. Again, it's a very dynamic and changing marketplace. So understanding how these things will change over time is anybody's guess in some ways. So we've seen that prices have been coming down considerably, but it's always nice to have the existence proof, right? So there's a significant gap between the US and Germany in system pricing. So this chart on the left shows the system pricing for California versus Germany. The California is in blue, it's the line that's the higher line, and the orange line is Germany. For systems less than 100 kilowatts, so they can be bigger than residential, but they're still on the smaller side. And we can see that this is a quarterly over the past couple of years. We can see the prices have been coming down almost in parallel for both places, with this gap of roughly $3 a watt between what's happening in Germany and what's happening in the US. And that's not a lot of difference in the hardware costs between the two. Modules are a global commodity, so yeah, you can buy modules, under $1 a watt, certainly, more like in the 60s to 70s cents per watt, pretty much anywhere in the world today. It's not the inverters. The inverters in the U.S. are probably a little bit more pricey, but again, it's in the pennies. Maybe it's 5 cents or 10 cents difference. So it's tied up in all the things that we're talking about. So it gets to that point that even if we can solve the technology cost questions, if we can't solve these soft cost questions, we're not going to get to the types of cost reduction targets that DOE has set out. So that's why we're here to talk about that today. And there's a lot of reasons. Germany, on the right-hand side, I show the market in Germany versus the US and Japan and China for the past couple of years. And you can see that Germany's market is dramatically bigger and has been for a number of years. And that type of scale creates a lot of efficiencies in the supply chain. So I think some of these costs will come down as we have increased scale, but there's sort of a chicken and egg challenge there, right? So you need to get scale to get cost, but you also need to get cost to get scale. So, and there's also, as Josh pointed out, not only a big difference in the way paperwork is within the US, but there's a really dramatic difference between the paperwork processes in the US versus Germany. In Germany, it's a couple pieces of paper. It's maybe 3, I don't know what it is. It's 2 or 3 sheets that you have to fill out. I think it's a 3-page application. It's guaranteed connection, and it's a very rapid turnaround. So, and that can be done. It can be done here, but that can't really come probably from the federal government because of jurisdictional issues. It's going to have to be solved, I think, initially at least, at the state level. And if a number of states sort of prove it out, maybe we'll be able to build the momentum and consensus to do it at a national level. But I think it's going to come from the states first. And there's also readily available financing in Germany from the German Federal Bank, from the KfW. That was part of the process they set up. So it's easy to interconnect, it's easy to get financing. It solved a lot of the problems in that. So if we're thinking about moving to a low-cost future, what's that low-cost future going to look like? And how is that different from today? So in the current environment, we have a federal incentive, we have some state incentives on top of that, at both the state and local level, and we have relatively high first costs. So a system today in the US still costs $20,000 to $30,000 in terms of its first cost. And that combination of different factors has created this window of opportunity for the third-party lease model to address a lot of these issues. And that's why I think we see it having a lot of success in the past couple of years. But we also have the technology and the markets and the policies all changing together pretty rapidly. So where we're going to end up, whether that continues to be the dominant way that the market is evolving in the U.S. is to be seen. So where might we be in the future? There's a lot of open questions here, and I'd say I have more questions about the future than answers. It'd be interesting to hear if there are folks on the installation side where they think, in the audience today, where they think things are going to be going. So there's questions about what will happen when the ITC expires in 2016. So again, the prize is in some ways, I think, helping to sort of push the industry to move to a place where it will be better positioned if the ITC does in fact expire, because it will be at lower cost in that period. There's questions about the ability to bring in new types of capital into the marketplace. So there's tax equity is, again, sort of as part of the way that current policies are structured in the ITC, folks need to attract tax equity investors. And there's a limited pool of tax equity investors in the current structure. So there's rules around things like master limited partnerships and renewable energy investment trusts that could change the availability of capital in the marketplace. We could see alternative financing mechanisms come into the marketplace, standardized loans, again, either at the state or the federal level potentially. I always sort of like to think about, and I pose it again to the folks that are installers in the audience, and what are the implications of reaching the type of cost levels that we are targeting in terms of the industry. If a typical residential rooftop PV system costs $5 to $6 or maybe $7,000, that's very different than a $20,000 or $30,000 investment. That's more like buying a used car, right? Actually, it's not bad for a used car today. So, you know, and people get those things financed all the time. There's lots of mechanisms. It's pretty easy. Again, you know, you don't have to fill out a lot of paperwork. So it's pretty straightforward. So if it's more like buying a used car, that would make it a lot easier for a lot, or maybe replacing the roof on your house or you move the HVAC or anything. It's also in the realm of the price of a lot of things that people already do, and we're able to get financing. Whether it's we go to Home Depot and they basically offer financing as part of the package, you know, or some other mechanism. So there's a lot of technical changes. So I talked about the microinverters, but we're talking about more sophisticated sort of plug and play or building integrated technologies, and there's a lot of investment and interest in that. And again, that'll have a lot of implications, both in terms of some of these questions about interconnection, you know, how you do that, how you register it, et cetera. But it will also have implications for the labor requirements potentially. So potentially for interaction between the technology side and the soft cost side. So, and then I think one of the things that is really interesting to me that's happening in the marketplace right now is that people are starting to combine solar with other services, whether that's efficiency or electric vehicles or security. We see sort of different companies getting into this space, trying to leverage their existing relationship with consumers to get into the marketplace and build off of these existing relationships and package solar as part of a service that's much broader than just solar. And I think that again, that offers some opportunities to leverage existing infrastructure that firms have. So again, I think we'll see a lot of changes and a lot of experimentation on the business side, and that the $10 million DOE prize is just the start of what the ultimate prize for this industry could be if you're a first mover and able to leverage and capture market. So I want to end just with this slide, which shows residential grid parity in this low cost post-ITC vision, and how reaching different price levels might unlock the residential market at different levels. So these charts basically show where solar is at grid parity on a geographical basis at 3 different price points. And what we see when we do this type of analysis is that there's a threshold below $3 a watt. And there's a lot of assumptions that go into these types of calculations. I sort of have this blue shaded box down at the bottom that talks about these assumptions. But you need to take into account, in terms of thinking about where you're at grid parity, both your solar resource availability, what your local electricity rates are, what types of financing you have available. So again, we've made some assumptions about those things and used sort of standard data sets. And what we find is that at $2 a watt, there are many states in the Southwest, as you can see, the sort of the dark blue states where we're at grid parity, and the Northeast that are at or below grid parity or close to being at grid parity. And so above $3 a watt, there's a lot more white in this in these maps, but below $3 a watt, we start to see that penetration in these different markets. And again, you look up in that Northeast area, you're already at $2.50 a watt. We're pretty dark here in New York and generally in New England, and that's because of high electricity prices, pretty much. Decent sun, very high electricity prices. So at $2 a watt, we see that most states are within 25% of reaching grid parity. You can see that the dark blue is really spread through a lot more of the country, and the medium blue is sort of covering most spaces. And at $1.50 a watt, the SunShot target, basically the entire country, except for 2 states, are at or below grid parity. So again, this doesn't mean that solar is going to be suitable for 100% of the homes in those states. There's still variation both in terms of the suitability of roofs, particular roofs, so it's only a fraction of the roofs that are suitable, and also there's variation in electricity prices within states and jurisdictions, so some are better than others. But it gives you a flavor of how the marketplace could open up pretty dramatically as prices come down on the pathway to the SunShot targets. Markets are all really beginning to open up. So that's it. Thank you for bearing with me.
We have a 15-minute break right now.
Okay, I'd like to move on with our workshop here. On the agenda, we have our keynote speaker today. Our keynote speaker is Richard Kaufman, who's the Energy Policy and Finance Subcabinet in New York State. Just a real quick introduction about Richard. He joined the administration here in New York State in February of 2013 as the chairman for Energy Policy and Finance. In this capacity, he oversees and coordinates energy policy through a subcabinet of energy agencies and public authorities here in New York by developing financial, legislative, regulatory policies that focus on scaling clean energy while ensuring a resilient and reliable energy infrastructure. He has worked in energy and finance at some of the highest levels of both the public and private sector. Prior to his current appointment, Richard served as senior advisor to Secretary Stephen Chu at the U.S. Department of Energy. In his private sector career, he was Chief Executive Officer of Good Energies, a leading investor in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, a partner of Goldman Sachs, where he chaired the Global Financing Group, and vice chairman of Morgan Stanley's Institutional Securities Business and co-head of its banking department. Richard received his bachelor's degree from Stanford, a master's degree in international relations from Yale, and a master's in public and private management from Yale School of Management. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Richard.
Thanks, Rudy, and thank you all for inviting me. I'm just a few weeks on my job, and the governor calls me the energy czar, and as I say, things didn't work out so well for czar, so I'm hoping that I can at least get through this speech. So, I want to talk about spray bottles. And I don't want to talk about spray bottles as it relates to cleaning solar modules. I actually want to talk about what's in a particular spray bottle, which is Febreze. Everybody knows what Febreze is? So I want to tell you a story about Febreze because it's an interesting story. So Febreze was developed by the good people at Procter & Gamble, and they observed that from a consumer standpoint, people were awfully busy. Had two people working really hard, taking two jobs, both husband and wives were working, and so guess what? What suffers but housework? So what would be a good product would be something that wouldn't just mask the odor, but would actually kill the odor. And that's what Febreze does. It's a fantastic product. So they did what you would expect a good consumer products company to do, which is to test market the product. So, they had some stinky socks and all kinds of stuff, as you can imagine. And they had a focus group and let people spray the items and hold it up to their nose, and isn't this a great product? Absolutely. Would you buy it? Sure. So they put it in the market, and there were some people that bought it, but we've all looked at forecasts, and this was a product that looked like it was a loser. So that led to some research and some head scratching. And so what was the research? Well, first they had to go out and kind of go back to actually find out those stinky places. Why weren't people using the product? So what they found, they said, well, we got to find the stinkiest places. So what are some of the stinkiest places that they could go to? Well, people that have kind of cats and lots of pets, right? That's usually good, hair everywhere. Let's go to those kind of places and we'll find out what their experiences are. Well, what they found was that people that live in those kind of places actually don't think it smells so bad. They don't notice the smell. So that explains sort of why they didn't buy the product. So they didn't think they had a problem. So that was part one of the research. And so then somebody had the idea, well, somebody's buying this Febreze. What about this group? What do they see? So they went and they found the relatively few people that bought Febreze, and they found something that was kind of interesting, which wasn't men that was using the product. It was women. So originally the product was designed for both men and women. It was women, and it was actually women that were cleaning. So again, the whole idea of the product was this was going to be a product sort of instead of cleaning. And it was people that were already cleaning, and what women were doing is that when they got done cleaning a room, they sprayed some Febreze around as a reward. Because they knew about that this was a good product. They knew about the product attributes, that it was an extra. So what Procter & Gamble did was to then amp up the amount of fragrance that they put in Febreze, and they changed their advertisements away from it being kind of solving a negative to being emphasizing a pleasurable experience. And Febreze is a successful product now. So, why am I telling you the story? Well, I'm telling you that story because it relates to this issue of you can have a good product, but you may not be able to get all the customers you want because you haven't figured out why customers buy what it is that you want. And so when we think about soft costs and solar, we got to think obviously about that part which relates to customer acquisition costs. And I do think we need to spend more time borrowing pages and lessons from people that are in the business of selling things to other people. Because not all of it is about the product, pure product attributes. So what consumer products companies do in the way that, as it were, the way that they reduce customer acquisition costs is that they segment the market. And they segment the market based upon consumer buying behavior. recognizing that all customers are the same. And customer segmentation, and I really want to make this point, customer segmentation is different from customer classification. And when we in our industry talk about residential solar or CNI, we're not talking about customer segmentation. We're talking about customer classification. Customer segmentation relates to the motivations of the buyers. And the motivation of the buyers can be the same across different customer classifications. In other words, the decision of somebody that's a residential homeowner can be motivated by the same things that motivate somebody that is doing a commercial and industrial purchase decision or lease decision. Or conversely, you can turn both of those customers off. So, so segmentation relates, again, to specific reasons that trigger buying behavior. That's what we got to focus on. And the best customer segmentation relates to things or determined by things that are emotional. How does somebody feel when they purchase a good or service? How are their emotions satisfied? And so we should think about segmentation as the first thing. It's the first thing that helps inform the product and product development. It's the first thing that then leads to a service model to serve each customer, the marketing message to each customer segment. And it's the way to allocate scarce marketing and customer origination costs. And it's the way, obviously, to maximize the demand for each segment. And that's how you lower your customer acquisition costs. And so if you don't do this, you don't segment the customers, you wind up kind of being all over the map. You wind up trying to serve, taking your limited customer acquisition funds, as it were, or your whatever other, however you want to think about it, spreading it across too big of a market. And you're not getting the bang for the buck. So let's go back to the Febreze story. And I know this part is not going to be fair, but you know what the heck? I'm here, I'm the czar. People in the solar business, I think, they have a pretty good product, right? We've got. Of course, there's a need for solar. I mean, that's we think about in terms of when we think about customers, we sort of try on this sort of notion. Of course, there's a need for solar. It's a renewable energy source, gives people independence, helps climate change. That's when we think about that in terms of customers, that this ought to be a good or a service that a customer buys. But we just need to make it cheaper. And we like the solar leasing model because it does make it cheaper, less upfront cost. But it falls into risk having us all fall into the Febreze trap. Which the problem with Febreze wasn't that the product wasn't good. It's that it wasn't good enough, right? And that's the issue. And when I talk about the product, it wasn't just the product, it was how the product was presented to the customer. It didn't make the customer, it didn't turn on enough customers. Didn't make enough customers feel good about buying Febreze. And once they figured out that there was a market segment that was interested in buying the product, then they were able to make the change and get more value for the product. So let's look at developments in the solar business through this sort of market segmentation eyes. So let's compare first the take-up of solar to energy efficiency, or to green power market. Because in a lot of states you can buy your own power through the utility and get green power. And so we know that solar actually has better adoption. So it's not necessarily economically the best decision. So there must be something for some segments of the market that like the visibility of solar, or like to know that solar is on their roof. That's what is the emotional connection. There's something emotional going on with that buying decision. You can think about a Prius. You know, there are lots of hybrids, but when you see a Prius, you know that it is a hybrid car. So are the people that are buying Priuses because they want other people to know that they're buying a hybrid car? It's more than just the hybrid car. So, so let's think about if that is a kind of segment, or the elements of a segment, or directions towards a segment. We've got to be careful about some of the things that we would do in that segment to not mess it up, to confuse the market, that market segment. Not necessarily clear to me that that segment is going to be so excited about having their product be bundled with energy efficiency, because you can't see energy efficiency. Let's look at the solar lease. Okay, so it is a fantastic financial innovation. You know, but you should also think about it that it satisfies a market segment that just wants things to be easy. All right? And we know from other consumer products and services that there is a market segment of people that just want things to be done one-stop shopping, right? And that's one of the things that a solar lease does. And it satisfies the people that like a product but just can't get over the buying decision unless things are easy for them. So we should think about, if we're going to kind of go after that, if there is that kind of make it easy segment, what are the other things that we could do to make it easy for them? Because there's some people that are in that segment that haven't already committed. Let's talk about community solar. Okay, so we know that that's a great way to lower solar costs. And so yes, you know, there's the idea of the community, but let's really kind of look even deeper at that kind of motivation. Because as my kids, you know, are telling me, you know, there's the FOMO effect, the fear of missing out. And so, I mean, I think you know this story about the, you know, the towel in the hotel room and hang up the towel and, you know, you save the planet. But that's not the sign that actually is the most effective sign. Because people aren't motivated to hang up the towel to save the planet. The effective sign is 75% of the people that stayed in the room hung up the towel. So there's something about this tribal part of wanting to be part of what's going on. Can be a very powerful motivator for some segment of the market. Because the point is, these are different categories of people. And so if community solar is really about FOMO, about fear of missing out, about being part of the tribe, then we need to think more about things that will make people feel more about the tribe and also more about the fear. So one of the things that consumer products companies will tell you